Tommy was 12 years old when this story took place, and if you had walked past him in the hallway at Riverside Middle School, you probably would have noticed something different about him. He had Down syndrome, which meant his face looked a bit different from other kids, and sometimes he spoke slower than his classmates. But what most people at school didn't know was that Tommy had a gift that would change everything. Every morning started the same way. Tommy's mom would drop him off at the front entrance, give him a warm hug, and remind him to have a good day. He would smile back at her, wave goodbye, and walk through those heavy double doors with his backpack hanging off one shoulder. And almost every morning, within minutes of entering the building, someone would laugh at him. It wasn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was just a group of girls giggling behind their hands when he passed by. Other times, boys would whisper to each other and point in his direction. Tommy had learned to keep his eyes forward and pretend he didn't notice. His mom had taught him that some people just don't understand, and that it wasn't his job to make them understand, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Lunchtime was the worst part of his day. The cafeteria was loud and crowded, filled with groups of friends sitting together, sharing food, and laughing at inside jokes. Tommy always got his tray and walked to the same corner table near the windows. He ate alone most days, watching the other kids have fun while he counted down the minutes until lunch period ended. Once, a boy named Brett walked past his table and made exaggerated movements with his arms, mimicking the way Tommy sometimes moved. Brett's friends erupted in laughter, and Tommy just looked down at his sandwich, his appetite disappearing. The teachers at school were hit or miss. Some of them were kind and patient with him, always making sure he understood the lessons. But others treated him like he was invisible. They would call on every other student in class before even glancing his way. When he raised his hand to answer a question, some teachers would just look past him and choose someone else. It was like they had already decided he couldn't possibly know the answer, so why bother asking? There was one teacher, Mr. Harrison, who taught history and never seemed comfortable around Tommy. Whenever Tommy asked a question, Mr. Harrison would respond in that slow, overly simple voice that adults sometimes use with very young children. Tommy was 12, not 2, but Mr. Harrison didn't seem to realize that. Other students would notice this and snicker, which made Tommy feel even smaller. But here's what nobody at school knew. Every single day, as soon as the final bell rang, Tommy would practically run out of that building. While other kids hung around talking, planning to meet up at someone's house or heading to after-school clubs, Tommy had somewhere he needed to be. He would rush to his mom's car, buckle his seatbelt, and the whole drive home, his mind would be somewhere else. He was thinking about his piano. Tommy's house was small but cozy. The living room had an old upright piano pushed against the far wall. It wasn't fancy or expensive. The wood was scratched and worn, and a few of the keys stuck if you pressed them too hard. But to Tommy, that piano was everything. His mom had bought it at a yard sale years ago for just $50. She thought maybe Tommy would enjoy making some noise on it, the way little kids do when they bang on piano keys. But something else happened instead. From the very first time Tommy sat down on that bench and pressed a key, something clicked inside him. The sound that came out wasn't just noise, it was a note. A specific pitch that resonated in his chest and made him feel something he couldn't quite explain. He pressed another key and another, and soon he was picking out simple melodies just by ear. His mom, Linda, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had taken piano lessons as a kid but had forgotten most of what she learned. Still, she sat with Tommy every afternoon and showed him what she remembered. She taught him the names of the notes, how to read the basic symbols on sheet music, and where to place his fingers. Tommy absorbed everything like a sponge. Within weeks, he was playing simple songs. Within months, he was playing things that Linda couldn't play herself. What amazed Linda the most was how Tommy understood music in a way she'd never seen before. He didn't just play the notes that were written on the page, he felt them. When he played something sad, you could hear the sadness in every note. When he played something joyful, the whole room seemed to brighten. Music wasn't just something Tommy did. It was something he was. Every day after school, Tommy would spend 3 or 4 hours at that piano. His fingers would dance across those worn keys, playing everything from simple children's songs to complex, classical pieces that seemed impossible for someone his age. The neighbors could hear the music through the walls, and some of them would sit on their porches just to listen. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door, told Linda that Tommy's music helped her feel less lonely in the evenings. But at school, nobody knew about this. Tommy never talked about his piano playing, partly because nobody really talked to him anyway, and partly because he was afraid of what they might say. What if they laughed at that too? What if they made fun of him for thinking he could play music? So he kept it to himself, a secret world that existed only in his living room, with his mom and little sister as his only audience. His sister Amy was 9 years old and thought Tommy was the coolest person in the world. She didn't care that he looked different or talked differently. She just knew that her big brother could make the most beautiful sounds she'd ever heard. Amy would sit cross-legged on the floor near the piano, sometimes doing her homework, sometimes just listening with her eyes closed. When Tommy finished playing, she would always clap and ask him to play one more song. On weekends, Tommy would spend even more time practicing. Linda had found old sheet music at thrift stores and the library, bringing home stacks of books for Tommy to explore. He worked his way through beginner books in weeks, then moved on to intermediate pieces. By the time he was 11, he was attempting advanced classical music that most adult hobbyists would struggle with. There was one piece in particular that Tommy had fallen in love with. It was a famous composition by Beethoven, slow and haunting and absolutely beautiful. The first time Tommy heard it on a YouTube video, he sat perfectly still, barely breathing, until the last note faded away. Then he looked up at his mom with tears in his eyes and said, "I want to play that." Linda listened to the piece and her heart sank a little. It was incredibly difficult, full of complex passages and demanding technique. She didn't want to discourage him, but she also didn't want him to feel frustrated. "Maybe we should work up to that one, sweetie," she suggested gently. But Tommy shook his head. He had already made up his mind. So every day Tommy worked on that piece. He practiced small sections over and over until his fingers remembered the patterns. He worked on the timing, the emotion, the subtle dynamics that made the piece come alive. It took months of patient work, countless mistakes, and moments of frustration. But slowly, steadily, Tommy learned to play Beethoven's masterpiece, and soon he was going to play it for an audience much bigger than his living room. He just didn't know it yet. It was a Tuesday morning when everything started to change. Tommy was sitting in homeroom doodling in his notebook when Principal Wagner's voice crackled through the intercom speaker mounted above the door. The usual morning announcements were boring, just reminders about homework deadlines and cafeteria menus. But then Principal Wagner said something that made Tommy's pencil stop moving. "And don't forget, everyone, the annual Spring Talent Show is coming up in 3 weeks. If you sing, dance, do magic tricks, or have any special talent you'd like to share, come sign up in the music room after school today. This is your chance to shine in front of the whole school." The classroom immediately buzzed with excitement. Kids started talking over each other about what they were going to do. Kelly and her friends were already planning a dance routine to some popular song. Ryan announced he was going to do a comedy act. A group of 8th graders in the back were forming a band. Everyone seemed to have an idea, and everyone seemed excited. Everyone except Tommy. He sat very still at his desk, his heart beating faster in his chest. An idea had just popped into his head, but it scared him so much that he almost pushed it away immediately. What if he signed up for the talent show? What if he played his piano piece in front of the whole school? The thought was terrifying. He imagined walking onto that stage, sitting at the piano bench and looking out at hundreds of faces staring back at him. He imagined what the other kids would say. They already laughed at him for just walking down the hallway. What would they do if he actually got up on stage and tried to perform? But another part of Tommy, a brave part that had been growing stronger with every hour he spent at his piano, whispered something different. Maybe this was his chance to show everyone who he really was. Maybe if they heard him play, they would finally understand that he wasn't just the kid they made fun of. He was someone who could do something amazing. All day long, Tommy wrestled with this decision. In math class, he barely heard a word the teacher said. During lunch, he picked at his food while the idea spun around and around in his mind. By the time the final bell rang, he had made up his mind. His hands were shaking, but he was going to do it. He was going to sign up. The music room was crowded when Tommy walked in. Mrs. Fletcher, the music teacher, sat at a table near the door with a clipboard and a pen. Students were lined up to add their names to the list, chattering excitedly about their acts. Tommy took his place at the back of the line, trying to calm his racing heart. As the line moved forward, Tommy noticed Brett standing with a group of his friends near the window. Brett was the same kid who had mocked Tommy in the cafeteria. When Brett saw Tommy in line, his eyes widened with surprise, and then he started laughing. He elbowed his friend Derek and pointed at Tommy. "No way," Brett said loudly enough for others to hear. "Is Tommy actually signing up for the talent show?" "This I have to see." Derek grinned and pulled out his phone. "Dude, this is going to be hilarious. I'm definitely recording this." Other kids started turning around to look. Some giggled, some whispered to their friends. Tommy felt his face getting hot, but he stayed in line. He kept his eyes focused straight ahead, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. When it was finally his turn, Mrs. Fletcher looked up at him with a polite but slightly confused smile. "Hi, Tommy," she said slowly, the way some adults did when they talked to him. "Did you want to sign up for something?" Tommy nodded. "I want to play piano," he said quietly. Mrs. Fletcher's smile faltered just a bit. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back at Tommy. "Piano? Do you take piano lessons?" "My mom taught me," Tommy replied. There was a pause. Mrs. Fletcher seemed unsure of what to say. Behind Tommy, he could hear Brett and his friends snickering. One of them made a comment about this being the funniest thing ever. Mrs. Fletcher heard it too, and for a moment Tommy thought she might tell him that the talent show wasn't a good idea. He could see the doubt in her eyes, but she couldn't say no. The talent show was open to all students, and there were no tryouts. If Tommy wanted to sign up, she had to let him. So she wrote his name on the list and asked what he was going to play. "Moonlight Sonata," Tommy said. "By Beethoven." Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows went up. She knew that piece. It was one of the most famous classical piano compositions in the world, and it was not easy. She looked at Tommy with concern, probably thinking he didn't understand how difficult it was. "Tommy, that's a very challenging piece. Maybe you'd like to choose something simpler? Something that would be easier to play in front of an audience?" Tommy shook his head. "I've been practicing it. I can do it." Mrs. Fletcher hesitated, then wrote down the song title next to his name. "All right," she said, though her voice suggested she wasn't convinced. "We'll see you at the show." Tommy thanked her and left the music room. As he walked out, he heard the explosion of laughter behind him. Brett was practically shouting to his friends about how Tommy had just signed up to play Beethoven. "Can you believe it? This is going to be a disaster. I can't wait to see this." The news spread through the school faster than Tommy could have imagined. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone knew that Tommy had signed up for the talent show, and everyone thought it was a joke. In the hallways between classes, kids would pretend to play piano badly whenever Tommy walked by. They'd slump their shoulders, stumble around, and bang imaginary keys while making awful sounds. Groups of students would laugh and point. Some would call out things like, "Hey Tommy, are you going to play chopsticks?" Or "Don't forget to bow after your big performance." Someone created a meme using a picture from the school website and shared it on social media. The caption said something mean about the upcoming talent show. Within hours, students from other schools had seen it and were leaving laughing emojis in the comments. Tommy didn't have social media himself, but Amy showed him the post one evening, tears in her eyes, angry that people were being so cruel to her brother. Even some of the teachers seemed concerned. Mr. Harrison pulled Tommy aside one day and asked if he was sure he wanted to go through with the performance. "It's okay to change your mind, Tommy," he said in that condescending voice. "Nobody would blame you if you decided not to do it." But Tommy didn't change his mind. Every afternoon he went home and practiced even harder than before. He played that Beethoven piece over and over, working through every difficult section until his fingers ached. His mom watched with a mixture of pride and worry. She was so amazed by his dedication, but she was also scared of what might happen at that talent show. What if the other kids were cruel? What if they laughed so loud that Tommy couldn't even finish his performance? One evening, Linda sat down next to Tommy on the piano bench after he'd been practicing for 3 hours straight. "Honey," she said gently, "you know you don't have to do this, right? You have nothing to prove to anyone." Tommy looked at his mom with those determined eyes she knew so well. "I want to do it, Mom. I need to show them." Linda hugged him tight, blinking back tears. "Then we'll show them together." Amy appointed herself as Tommy's personal coach. She helped him practice walking onto an imaginary stage in their living room. She taught him to take deep breaths when he felt nervous. She even made him practice bowing, which made them both laugh because Tommy had never bowed to anyone in his life. But Amy insisted that real performers always bowed, so Tommy needed to learn. At night, lying in bed, Tommy would run through the piece in his mind. His fingers would twitch slightly under the covers as he imagined pressing each key. He thought about all the times kids had laughed at him, all the times teachers had treated him like he couldn't understand, all the lonely lunches at that corner table. In 3 weeks, he would sit at a piano in front of all of them, and they would finally hear what he'd been trying to say all along. The days leading up to the talent show felt like the longest days of Tommy's life. Each morning, he woke up with butterflies in his stomach that wouldn't go away, no matter how much breakfast his mom made him eat. The talent show was all anyone at school could talk about, and Tommy's name kept coming up in conversations he wished he couldn't hear. During lunch one day, Tommy overheard a group of girls at the next table talking about the show. One of them was listing all the acts she was excited to see. She mentioned Kelly's dance group, Ryan's comedy routine, and the 8th grade band. Then another girl said, "What about that kid, Tommy? Are you going to watch that?" They all burst out laughing. One girl said she felt bad for him, but another said she was definitely going to watch because it would probably be the most entertaining disaster of the night. Tommy's sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. He wrapped it back up and threw it away, his appetite gone. But instead of letting the comments crush him, he used them as fuel. That afternoon, he practiced for 4 hours straight without taking a break. His mom had to practically force him to stop for dinner. At school, the mockery was getting worse. Someone had made fake posters announcing Tommy's performance and taped them to the walls in the hallway. The posters had exaggerated drawings and silly captions. The school staff took them down as soon as they found them, but the damage was done. Tommy saw one before it was removed, and even though he tried not to let it bother him, his eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall. Brett and his crew had turned tormenting Tommy into their daily entertainment. They would find him in the hallway and ask questions in fake sweet voices. "Hey, Tommy, are you getting nervous about your big concert?" Brett would say, his friends giggling behind him. "Make sure you don't mess up in front of everyone. That would be so embarrassing." Then they would walk away laughing, leaving Tommy standing there with his fists clenched at his sides. One afternoon, Tommy was walking to his mom's car after school when he heard footsteps running up behind him. He turned around to see Amy's friend, a girl named Violet from her 4th grade class. Violet was out of breath, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. "Tommy, wait," she called out. When she caught up to him, she had to bend over and catch her breath for a moment. "I just wanted to tell you that my mom heard you practicing through the window last weekend. She teaches piano at the community college, and she said you're really, really good. She wanted me to tell you that." Tommy felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Really?" he asked. Violet nodded enthusiastically. "Really. She said most of her college students can't play as well as you do. So don't listen to those mean kids at school. They don't know what they're talking about." She gave him a thumbs up and ran off to find her own mom. That small moment of kindness meant more to Tommy than Violet would ever know. When he got home, he told his mom about it, and Linda had to wipe away happy tears. "See," she said, hugging him tight. "Some people understand. And after the show, everyone will understand." As the talent show got closer, Tommy's practice sessions became even more intense. He wasn't just playing the notes anymore. He was living inside the music, feeling every emotion that Beethoven had put into the composition over 200 years ago. The piece started soft and melancholy like moonlight reflecting on still water. Then it grew more passionate, more urgent before settling back into that haunting gentleness. Tommy played it so many times that Amy said she could hear it in her dreams. Linda watched her son transform during these practice sessions. When Tommy sat at that piano, all the difficulties he faced in the outside world seemed to disappear. His movements became confident and precise. His face showed a focus and determination that took her breath away. She wondered how many people at that school had any idea what this boy was capable of. 1 week before the show, Mrs. Fletcher called Linda at home. Tommy was upstairs practicing, so he didn't hear the conversation. Mrs. Fletcher's voice was gentle but concerned. "Mrs. Peterson, I wanted to talk to you about Tommy's performance. I'm worried about him. The other students have been saying some unkind things, and I'm afraid he might be setting himself up for a difficult situation." Linda felt her protective instincts kick in. "What are you suggesting, Mrs. Fletcher?" "Well, I just think maybe we should consider whether this is the right environment for Tommy to perform. Perhaps he could play at a smaller event, something less public. The talent show can be very stressful, and with the way some students have been behaving, I'm concerned about his well-being." Linda took a deep breath. She knew Mrs. Fletcher meant well, but she also knew her son. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Fletcher, but Tommy wants to do this. He's worked incredibly hard, and he deserves the chance to show everyone what he can do. Unless you're canceling his performance, he'll be there." There was a pause on the other end. "No, of course we're not canceling. I just wanted you to be aware of the situation." "I'm aware," Linda said firmly. "And so is Tommy. He's stronger than people think." After she hung up, Linda went upstairs and stood in the doorway of the living room, watching Tommy practice. He was so absorbed in the music that he didn't notice her there. His fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed almost impossible. This wasn't just a hobby or a party trick. This was a gift, a real, genuine gift. And in less than a week, the whole school was going to see it. The night before the talent show, Tommy could barely eat dinner. He pushed his food around his plate, his mind clearly somewhere else. Amy chatted nervously, trying to fill the silence, telling jokes that didn't quite land. Linda watched them both with her heart in her throat. After dinner, Tommy went to the piano one more time. He'd already practiced for hours that afternoon, but he needed to play it one more time. Just once more to make sure. His fingers found the keys, and the familiar opening notes filled the house. Linda and Amy sat on the couch together, listening. This time, Tommy played the piece all the way through without a single mistake. Every note was perfect, every phrase exactly right. When he finished, the house fell silent. Tommy sat at the piano bench, his hand still resting on the keys, and whispered, "I'm ready." Amy jumped up from the couch and ran over to hug him. "You're going to be amazing, Tommy. Those kids at school don't know what's coming." Linda joined them, wrapping both her children in a hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that." That night, Tommy lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He wasn't scared anymore, not really. Yes, his heart was beating fast, and yes, he kept imagining walking onto that stage. But he also kept imagining something else. He imagined the moment when everyone stopped laughing. He imagined the sound of the piano filling the auditorium. He imagined people finally hearing him, really hearing him for the first time. He thought about all the kids who had made fun of him. Brett and Derek and all the others who had laughed in the hallways, made those posters, created those memes. He thought about the teachers who had doubted him, who had spoken to him like he was a little kid who couldn't understand. He thought about every lonely lunch, every whispered comment, every time someone had looked at him and decided he wasn't worth their time. Tomorrow, they would all be in that auditorium. They would all be watching. And Tommy was going to show them exactly who he was. His mom had told him once that music was a language everyone could understand, even when words failed. Tomorrow, Tommy was going to speak that language louder and clearer than he ever had before. He was going to tell his story through Beethoven's notes, through those keys he'd practiced on for thousands of hours. Tommy closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His fingers moved slightly under the covers, running through the piece one more time in his mind. Every note was there, locked in his memory, waiting to be released. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. He just had to be brave for a little bit longer. The morning of the talent show arrived with bright sunshine streaming through Tommy's bedroom window. He woke up early, his stomach doing somersaults. For a moment, he thought about pretending to be sick. It would be so easy to just stay home, to avoid the whole thing. But then he remembered why he was doing this, and he got out of bed. Linda made Tommy's favorite breakfast, pancakes with chocolate chips, but he could only manage a few bites. Amy sat across from him at the table, giving him an encouraging smile every few seconds. She had made him a good luck card the night before, covered in glitter and drawings of musical notes. It was taped to the refrigerator now, and every time Tommy looked at it, he felt a little bit braver. School that day was torture. Tommy couldn't focus on anything his teachers were saying. In every class, students were buzzing about the talent show that evening. He heard his name mentioned more times than he could count. Some kids were taking bets on how badly he would mess up. Others were already planning to record his performance on their phones, clearly expecting something to go viral for all the wrong reasons. During lunch, Brett walked right up to Tommy's table, something he'd never done before. He stood there with his arms crossed, that mean smile on his face. "So Tommy, tonight's your big night, huh? You nervous?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You should be. The whole school's going to be watching. That's a lot of pressure for someone like you." Tommy looked up at Brett and said something he'd been practicing with Amy. "I'll be fine. Thanks for coming to watch." His voice didn't shake, and he looked Brett right in the eye when he said it. Brett's smile faltered for just a second. He clearly hadn't expected Tommy to respond at all, let alone with confidence. He made a dismissive sound and walked away, but Tommy noticed he looked less sure of himself than usual. That small victory made Tommy's heart beat a little slower. The final bell rang at 3 o'clock and students poured out of classrooms, heading home to get ready for the show that evening. Tommy went home with his mom and Amy, and the house felt strangely quiet. The piano sat in the living room like always, but Tommy didn't practice. He'd done all the practice he could do. Now he just needed to rest and stay calm. At 6 o'clock, they got in the car to drive back to school. Tommy wore his nicest outfit, a button-up shirt and dark pants that his mom had ironed that morning. Amy sat in the back seat with him, holding his hand the whole way there. Linda kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, her eyes shining with emotion she was trying to hold back. The school parking lot was packed when they arrived. Families were streaming toward the auditorium entrance, everyone excited and chattering. Tommy felt like he was moving through a dream as they walked inside. The auditorium was huge, with rows and rows of red seats facing a big stage with heavy curtains. It was filling up fast, and the noise of hundreds of conversations echoed off the walls. Mrs. Fletcher found Tommy and led him backstage, where all the other performers were gathered. The energy back there was electric. Kids were doing last-minute rehearsals, adjusting costumes and giving each other pep talks. When Tommy walked in, a few students stopped what they were doing and stared. He heard someone whisper, "He actually showed up." The backstage area had a small piano pushed against the wall for Tommy to use during his performance. It was better than the one he had at home, newer and well-tuned. Tommy sat down at it for a moment, just letting his fingers rest on the keys. He didn't play anything, just felt the coolness of the ivory under his fingertips. This was it. This was really happening. Mrs. Fletcher came over with her clipboard. "Tommy, you're going to be performing 8th in the lineup. That's about halfway through the show. Are you feeling okay? Do you need anything?" Tommy shook his head. "I'm okay." She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time Tommy saw something different in her expression. It wasn't doubt or pity. It was something closer to hope. "Good luck up there," she said, and she sounded like she actually meant it. The show started at 7 o'clock sharp. Principal Wagner walked onto the stage to welcome everyone, and the audience erupted in applause. Tommy watched from the wings as the first performers went on.
Kill.
Lai and her friends did their dance routine to loud cheers. Ryan's comedy act had people laughing so hard that Tommy could hear it clearly even backstage. Each performance seemed to go perfectly, and the audience loved everything. As Tommy waited for his turn, his heart pounded so hard he thought everyone around him must be able to hear it. His hands felt cold and a little sweaty. He wiped them on his pants and took deep breaths the way Amy had taught him. He could hear his mother's voice in his head, telling him he could do this. He could hear Amy saying he was going to be amazing. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really only about 40 minutes, Mrs. Fletcher touched Tommy's shoulder. "You're next," she said softly. "They're going to wheel the piano out onto the stage for you. When you hear Principal Wagner call your name, you walk out there and take your seat. The spotlight will be on you, so you might not be able to see the audience very well. Just focus on the piano. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded. His mouth was too dry to speak. He watched from the wings as 2 staff members wheeled the piano to the center of the stage. The audience murmured with interest. Piano performances were always impressive, and people were curious to see who was about to play. Then Principal Wagner's voice boomed through the speakers. "Our next performer is 7th grader Tommy Peterson, who will be playing Moonlight Sonata by Ludwig van Beethoven." There was applause. But Tommy also heard something else. Laughter, scattered giggles and whispers that rippled through the crowd. He heard someone say this should be good in a sarcastic tone. As he stepped out from behind the curtain and into the bright lights, the laughter grew louder. Tommy walked across the stage, his legs feeling shaky. The auditorium was massive from up here, every seat filled with faces staring at him. He could see students in the front rows nudging each other, phones already out and recording. He saw Brett sitting with his friends, all of them grinning and whispering. The laughter wasn't mean and loud, but it was there, a constant background noise that said, "We don't believe in you." He reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. Someone in the audience made a comment that got a burst of laughter from their section. Tommy's hands were shaking as he positioned them over the keys. For just a second, doubt crashed over him like a wave. What was he doing? These people were already laughing at him. What if he messed up? What if he proved them all right? But then Tommy's fingers touched the keys and something inside him clicked into place. He thought about all those hours in his living room, his mom sitting beside him, Amy on the floor listening with her eyes closed. He thought about Mrs. Chen next door who said his music made her feel less lonely. He thought about Violet's mom, the college piano teacher, who said he played better than her students. Tommy closed his eyes, took one more deep breath and began to play. The first note rang out into the auditorium, pure and clear and perfect. Then the second note and the third. The opening phrase of Moonlight Sonata floated through the air, soft and haunting and absolutely beautiful. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. The laughter stopped. It didn't fade away gradually. It just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The whispers died mid-sentence. The phones that had been held up to record a disaster slowly lowered. Every single person in that auditorium went completely still. Tommy kept playing, his eyes still closed, lost in the music. His fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision, each note exactly where it needed to be. The melody flowed from the piano like water, like moonlight, like something too beautiful to be real. The first movement of the piece was gentle and melancholic, each phrase carefully shaped, each dynamic perfectly controlled. In the audience, people sat frozen in their seats. Brett's mouth had fallen open, his cruel smile completely gone. The students who had been laughing moments before now stared at the stage with expressions of shock. Parents who had brought their kids to the show found tears forming in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. This was music that reached inside your chest and grabbed hold of your heart. Tommy wasn't just hitting the right notes at the right time. He was telling a story without words, sharing emotions that were too big and too complex for language. Every person in that room could feel it, whether they knew anything about music or not. Mrs. Fletcher stood in the wings with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had doubted him. She had tried to talk his mother out of letting him perform. And now she was listening to one of the most beautiful performances she had heard in her 30 years of teaching music. Tommy played on, moving through the piece with complete confidence. His practice had been perfect preparation. His fingers knew exactly where to go. His heart knew exactly what to feel. And for these few precious minutes, nothing else in the world existed except the piano and the music and the story. He was finally able to tell. Tommy played the final notes of Moonlight Sonata, letting them ring out into the silence of the auditorium. His hands lifted slowly from the keys, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The last note faded away into nothing, and still nobody made a sound. Then it happened. One person started clapping. Then another. Then suddenly the entire auditorium exploded with applause. But this wasn't the polite clapping that had followed the other performances. This was different. People were on their feet, standing and applauding with an energy that shook the room. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, beautiful. Tommy opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. Through the bright stage lights, he could see hundreds of people standing, their hands coming together again and again. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, like they couldn't quite process what they just heard. In the front row, he saw Brett standing with everyone else, clapping, his face showing an emotion Tommy had never seen there before. It looked almost like shame. Tommy stood up from the piano bench, his legs feeling wobbly. He remembered what Amy had taught him about bowing, so he did a small, awkward bow. The applause somehow got even louder. People were cheering now, calling out words of praise. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" like they were at a professional concert. Tommy felt dizzy with emotion, barely able to process what was happening. As he walked off the stage, Mrs. Fletcher was waiting in the wings. She grabbed him into a tight hug, not caring that there were tears running down her face. "Tommy," she said, her voice breaking. "That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. I'm so sorry I doubted you. I'm so sorry." Tommy hugged her back, too overwhelmed to say much of anything. Other performers backstage were staring at him with new eyes, whispering to each other in amazed tones. A girl from the dance group came over and told him his performance was incredible. The 8th grade band kids, who had barely acknowledged him before, gave him high fives and told him he'd blown everyone away. Out in the audience, Linda was crying so hard that Amy had to hand her tissues from her pocket. Amy was crying too, but she was also grinning from ear to ear, so proud of her brother that she felt like she might burst. Around them, other parents were leaning over to ask who that talented boy was. Linda heard one mother say to another, "That was extraordinary. That child is a genuine prodigy." The rest of the talent show continued, but it was clear that everyone's mind was still on Tommy's performance. The remaining acts did their best and they were good, but they were following something that had touched people in a way that juggling or singing pop songs couldn't quite match. When the show ended and Principal Wagner came back on stage to thank everyone for coming, he made a special mention of Tommy's performance, saying it was something the school would remember for years to come. After the show, Tommy met his mom and sister in the lobby. Linda wrapped him in the biggest hug of his life, holding him close and telling him over and over how proud she was. Amy jumped around them in circles, too excited to stand still. Other families passing by stopped to congratulate Tommy. Parents he'd never met shook his hand. Little kids asked if he could teach them to play piano. Then something unexpected happened. Brett appeared in the crowd, walking toward Tommy without his usual group of friends. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. When he got close enough, he stopped and looked at Tommy with an expression that was hard to read. "Hey, Tommy," Brett said quietly. "I just wanted to say that was really amazing. Like, seriously amazing. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for being such a jerk to you. I was wrong. Really wrong." He held out his hand. Tommy looked at Brett's outstretched hand for a moment. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let Brett feel the same rejection he'd felt so many times. But Tommy wasn't built that way. He reached out and shook Brett's hand. "Thanks," Tommy said simply. Brett nodded, looking relieved, and walked away. Linda squeezed Tommy's shoulder, impressed by her son's grace. Amy whispered, "You're a better person than he deserves." The next morning at school, everything was different. When Tommy walked through the front doors, students actually said hello to him. Not in a mocking way, but genuinely. Kids he'd never spoken to came up to tell him they'd been at the show and thought his performance was incredible. Some asked questions about how long he'd been playing, where he'd learned, whether he was going to pursue music professionally. At lunch, something happened that Tommy never thought possible. A group of students asked if they could sit at his table, not to make fun of him, but because they actually wanted to sit with him. Within minutes, his usual lonely corner table was surrounded by kids asking about his music, telling him about their own hobbies, treating him like a regular person, like someone worth knowing. Kelly, the girl who'd performed the dance routine, came over and apologized for laughing when he'd signed up. "I feel terrible about it," she admitted. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. That performance was honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen." The teachers noticed the change too. Mr. Harrison, who had always spoken to Tommy like a small child, approached him in the hallway and genuinely apologized. "I underestimated you, Tommy, and that was my failure, not yours. You taught me an important lesson last night." From that day on, Mr. Harrison treated Tommy with the same respect he showed every other student. Mrs. Fletcher called Linda again, but this time the conversation was completely different. She wanted to help Tommy develop his gift. She connected Linda with a professional piano teacher in town who offered to give Tommy lessons at a reduced rate. She also told Linda about youth competitions and performance opportunities that Tommy should consider. "He has a real future in music if he wants it," Mrs. Fletcher said. "That kind of talent is rare." The video of Tommy's performance spread beyond just the school. Someone's parent had recorded it and posted it online, and within days it had been viewed thousands of times, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Comments flooded in from people all over the world who were moved by the performance. Musicians, teachers, and music lovers praised Tommy's technique and emotional depth. Many commented on how powerful it was to see someone overcome prejudice and doubt with pure talent and determination. A local news station reached out and did a story about Tommy. The reporter interviewed him at his home piano, asking about his journey and what music meant to him. Tommy, who had been so quiet and withdrawn at school for so long, spoke clearly and passionately about how music was his way of expressing things he couldn't always put into words. The segment aired during prime time, and suddenly Tommy wasn't just known at Riverside Middle School. He was known throughout the whole community, but perhaps the most meaningful change was the one that happened inside the school itself. Teachers started using Tommy's story in their lessons, talking about the importance of not judging people based on appearances or assumptions. The school started a program to promote inclusion and understanding of students with disabilities. Posters went up in the hallways with messages about seeing people for who they really are, not who you assume they are. Students who had never thought much about bullying or exclusion started to think about it differently. They remembered how they'd laughed at Tommy, how they'd assumed he would fail, and how completely wrong they'd been. Some of them carried that lesson with them and started noticing other kids who were being left out or made fun of. They started speaking up, sitting with lonely kids at lunch, defending people who were being mocked. Tommy still practiced piano every afternoon, but now it felt different. He wasn't practicing to prove anything to anyone anymore. He was practicing because he loved it, because music was part of who he was. His mom would listen from the kitchen, sometimes stopping whatever she was doing just to close her eyes and let the music wash over her. Amy still sat on the floor during practice sessions, still his biggest fan, still believing her brother could do anything. Months later, Tommy performed at a community concert hall for a real audience who had bought tickets specifically to hear him play. He performed more Beethoven, some Chopin, and a modern piece that showcased his range. The audience gave him another standing ovation. But Tommy had learned by then that the applause wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the music itself. What mattered was having the courage to share his gift with the world, even when the world had been unkind to him. What mattered was proving that every person has value, has abilities, has something important to offer, if only others will take the time to look and listen. Tommy had spent years being invisible, being dismissed, being laughed at, but that night at the talent show, when his fingers touched those piano keys, he had finally been heard. Not just heard, but truly listened to. And in being heard, he had changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who had been in that auditorium. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one performance, one act of courage, to change how people see the world. Tommy had given his school that moment, and nobody who was there that night would ever forget it.